What happens when an undercover boss visits her boutique? Evelyn Carter had asked herself that question countless times before she finally decided to act. The thought had lingered in her mind, gnawing at her conscience every time she passed one of her boutique's flagship stores and wondered what really went on behind the polished glass displays and carefully curated social media presence. Eve's Atelier bore her name, her vision, her craftsmanship. But had it retained her values? Disguised as Eva Clark, a seamstress with nothing but a battered portfolio and an eagerness to work, she pushed open the boutique's heavy glass doors. A gentle chime rang through the air, accompanied by the crisp scent of high-end fabric and the faint trace of lavender, her signature store fragrance, unchanged since the boutique's inception. For a moment, nostalgia threatened to soften her resolve, but then she reminded herself, she wasn't here as the owner. She was here as a stranger. The boutique exuded opulence, with mannequins adorned in delicate silks and embroidered gowns. But beneath the glamour, Evelyn could sense something else, an underlying tension, a stiffness in the air that had nothing to do with luxury. She stepped cautiously toward the front desk, where a woman in a sleek, navy blue dress barely glanced up from her phone. Yes. The word was clipped impatient. "I'm here about the seamstress position," Evelyn said, keeping her voice light, unassuming. The woman, Vivian Holt, according to the gold name tag on her chest, finally looked up, arching a single, perfectly shaped brow. The position's already filled. Evelyn knew for a fact that wasn't true. She had arranged for an unannounced hiring window after reviewing reports of overworked staff. Keeping her expression neutral, she pressed on. "I have my portfolio. I'd love a chance to show you my work." Vivian exhaled through her nose, a sound of utter disinterest. "We don't just let anyone in off the street. This is Eve's Atelier." A soft cough interrupted the moment, and a woman in her 60s, hands worn from years of needlework, stepped forward. "Vivian, why don't we take a look? We've been needing extra hands, and I'd be happy to test her." Margaret. Evelyn recognized her instantly. The woman had been with the company almost as long as she had, one of the first seamstresses she'd ever hired. She wondered if Margaret would recognize her under the cheap brown wig and thick-rimmed glasses. If she did, she gave no sign. Vivian let out an exasperated sigh, but waved a dismissive hand. "Fine. She's your problem." Margaret led Evelyn through the boutique, past the elegant showroom, and into the workroom tucked behind a velvet curtain. The difference was stark. No marble floors, no soft music, just the rhythmic hum of sewing machines and the sharp scent of starch. The workroom was smaller than Evelyn remembered, the lighting dimmer, the air thick with silent exhaustion. A young woman hunched over a sewing machine near the back, fingers trembling as she stitched a delicate row of beads onto a gown. Her expression was tight with concentration, her brow furrowed in quiet distress. "That's Lena," Margaret said in a hushed voice. "She's one of our best, but Vivian's been riding her hard lately." Evelyn observed the girl's movements, skilled but hurried, as if she feared she was running out of time. A single mistake could mean disaster. Margaret set a bundle of fabric in front of Evelyn. "Let's see what you can do. We need an invisible hem on this by end of day." Evelyn slid into a chair, fingers brushing over the fabric, muscle memory taking over. She threaded the needle swiftly, letting the familiar rhythm ground her. As she worked, she listened. The other seamstresses murmured among themselves, careful to keep their voices low. The conversation was hushed, words laced with unease. "Did you hear? Vivian cut our overtime pay again. I swear she's pocketing the difference. She threatened to fire Lena this morning." The tension thickened, settling into Evelyn's bones. She had anticipated finding problems, but she hadn't expected the atmosphere to be so stifling, so filled with fear. The curtain separating the showroom from the workroom fluttered, and suddenly Vivian was there, sharp heels clicking against the tile. She crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes at Evelyn's work. "Hurry it up. We don't have all day," she snapped. Then, Her gaze flicked to Lena. "And you? If that embroidery isn't done by closing, don't bother coming back tomorrow." Lena flinched, her hands going still. The thread slipped from her fingers. Something in Evelyn's chest tightened. She knew cruelty when she saw it. And she knew without a doubt that this was only the beginning. Evelyn stitched in silence, her fingers moving with practiced ease even as her mind swirled with unease. The tension in the workroom was suffocating, a stark contrast to the boutique's polished exterior. The women here were craftsmen, artists, even, but instead of pride, their faces carried exhaustion, their bodies stiff with quiet apprehension. The hum of the sewing machines masked the murmurs of discontent, but Evelyn had already seen enough to know the truth. Something was deeply wrong. Across the room, Lena sat rigid at her station, her gaze fixed on the delicate embroidery she was painstakingly working on. Despite her clear skill, she moved with the hesitant, measured precision of someone who had been reprimanded too often. Vivian's words from earlier still clung to the air like a thick perfume, a lingering presence meant to keep everyone in check. Evelyn watched as Lena paused, flexing her fingers before carefully resuming her work. The young seamstress was fast, methodical, and incredibly talented, but she was also terrified. The realization sat heavy in Evelyn's stomach. She had built Eve's atelier to be a sanctuary for creatives, a place where craftsmanship was honored. But now, looking around at the hunched shoulders and darting glances, she saw only workers scrambling to avoid a misstep. Margaret leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Be careful around Vivian," she murmured. "She doesn't take kindly to people who question her." Evelyn feigned ignorance. "She seems particular." Margaret's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Particular is one way to put it. She controls everything, the schedules, the pay, even who gets to speak with the clients. She's been cutting corners for months now, pressuring us to work faster, take fewer breaks. And if you complain..." Margaret exhaled sharply. "You're gone." Evelyn's jaw tightened. The store was thriving, sales were better than ever. So why were her employees being pushed to their limits? Where was the money going? The curtain to the showroom shifted, and Mark, the assistant manager, stepped through. He was younger than she remembered, perhaps in his early 30s, dressed in a sharp suit that didn't quite fit the role of someone who worked among artisans. His expression was careful, though not unkind. "Vivian wants a word," he said, directing his attention to Lena. The young woman visibly stiffened, her hand gripping the edge of the table. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before standing, pressing her palms against her skirt to smooth invisible wrinkles. Evelyn noticed how she inhaled deeply before stepping forward, as if preparing for battle. Lena disappeared into the showroom, the heavy curtains swinging shut behind her. Evelyn waited only a beat before placing her needle down and rising. "Bathroom?" she asked casually. Margaret pointed to the hallway leading past the fitting rooms, but Evelyn had no intention of going there. Instead, she moved toward the curtain, pausing just out of sight as she focused on the voices beyond. "I don't understand, Ms. Holt," Lena was saying, her voice subdued but laced with urgency. "I logged all my hours. My paycheck is short." A pause. Then Vivian's voice, smooth as silk, sharpened at the edges. "You should be grateful you have a job at all, Lena." Evelyn's fingers curled into a fist. "But it's not right. I worked overtime this week." "You'll take what you're given," Vivian interrupted, her tone clipped with finality. "And if I hear one more complaint, I'll find someone else who actually appreciates the opportunity to work here." Silence. Evelyn pictured Lena standing there, shoulders drawn inward, trapped between standing up for herself and keeping the job she clearly needed. Then, softly, "I understand." Evelyn stepped back just as the curtain shifted. Lena reappeared, her expression carefully blank, but the red-rimmed edges of her eyes betrayed her. She walked past Evelyn without a word, returning to her station and picking up her embroidery as if nothing had happened. Vivian emerged next, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she walked straight toward Mark. "Make sure she gets the message," she muttered, not bothering to lower her voice. "And if she pushes again, I want her gone by the end of the week." Mark nodded stiffly, but didn't meet her gaze. Evelyn noted the tension in his shoulders, the slight downturn of his mouth. He wasn't comfortable with what he was being asked to do. Good. That meant he was useful. Evelyn forced herself to return to her seat, forcing her expression into something unreadable as she picked up her work again. But inside, something simmered. This wasn't just a case of poor management. This was control, manipulation, theft. And now, she had proof. The air in the boutique had changed. Though the showroom remained a vision of elegance, shimmering with soft lighting and silken fabrics, the workroom behind it vibrated with unease. Evelyn could feel the shift, the way the seamstresses worked in hurried silence, their eyes darting toward the entrance, as if expecting another storm to crash through at any moment. And she knew exactly where that storm would come from. Vivian had been watching her. She could feel the woman's scrutiny like a blade against her spine, the way her gaze lingered just a fraction too long whenever Evelyn moved through the boutique. She had been careful, never pushing too hard, never revealing too much, but Vivian was too accustomed to control to let an unknown element slip by unnoticed. The moment she suspected someone was a threat, she would act. And that moment came faster than Evelyn anticipated. A sudden commotion snapped her attention across the workroom. Lena stood at her station, face flushed, her hands clenched into fists. In front of her, Vivian loomed, her expression a perfect mask of feigned disappointment. But the sharpness in her voice cut through any illusion of sympathy. "How many times do I have to tell you, Lena?" she said, her voice cold and clipped. "This is unacceptable." Evelyn rose slowly from her seat, setting down her fabric as she assessed the scene. Lena's latest embroidery piece, a stunning, intricate floral pattern, lay discarded on the table, but something was wrong. The beads had been ripped from the fabric, the stitches pulled loose, as if someone had intentionally sabotaged it. "I don't understand," Lena stammered. "I finished this just last night." "It was perfect," Vivian scoffed. "Perfect? Look at it. Would you sell something like this under my name?" "It wasn't like this," Lena insisted, her voice shaking. "I checked it before I left." "Are you calling me a liar?" Vivian's tone sharpened, the words slicing through the room like a blade. Evelyn's patience snapped. "She's not calling you a liar," she said, standing up. "She's saying something isn't right." The room turned silent. All eyes shifted toward her. Vivian turned slowly, fixing her with a look of utter disdain. "Stay out of this," she said smoothly. "You're barely employed here." Evelyn didn't back down. "Then fire me. But we both know that's not the issue here." A muscle in Vivian's jaw ticked. Evelyn glanced at the ruined embroidery. She had seen Lena's work. The girl was meticulous, careful beyond measure. The damage hadn't been caused by a mistake. It had been done deliberately. "You did this, didn't you?" Evelyn said, her voice calm but firm. "You destroyed her work so you'd have an excuse to fire her." Gasps rippled through the room. Vivian's lips curled into something resembling amusement. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Do you?" Evelyn countered, stepping closer. "You think you can intimidate these women into silence? Steal their wages, cut corners, take credit for their work?" Her voice dropped, dangerously soft. "You think no one will find out?" Vivian let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Find out? Find out what? That I run this place, while you people just stitch fabric? Do you think customers care who sews the damn dress? They care about the brand. About me." Evelyn exhaled, her patience extinguished. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. With one swipe, she unlocked the screen and held it up. The Yves Atelier Company ID glowed on display, her full name and title unmistakable. The workroom stilled. Vivian's smirk faltered. Her eyes flickered from the phone to Evelyn's face, her breath hitching for just a fraction of a second. "My name," Evelyn said, voice steady, "is Evelyn Carter. And this is my boutique." The silence was absolute. Margaret took a sharp inhale, her hand covering her mouth. Lena's eyes widened in shock, darting from Evelyn to the phone and back again. Even Mark, standing just beyond Vivian, looked as though the ground had been yanked out from beneath him. Vivian's face drained of color, but she recovered fast, straightening her spine. "This is ridiculous," she scoffed, though her voice wavered. "You're lying." Evelyn turned the phone toward the room, letting them see the undeniable proof before sliding it back into her pocket. "I've spent the last week watching you," she said, her voice quieter now, more dangerous. "I've seen you steal from these women. I've seen you humiliate them, overwork them, and threaten them." She took a step closer, her presence now unmistakably authoritative. "And I am done watching." Vivian swallowed. I was just following policy," she stammered. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Evelyn interrupted, her patience gone. "And I have no use for someone who abuses their authority." She turned to Mark. "Call security." "I want her out of here." Mark hesitated. "Now," Evelyn ordered. That broke him from his paralysis. He turned and strode out of the room, pulling his phone from his pocket as he went. Vivian's breath came quicker now, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. "Wait, Evelyn, we can talk about this. I built this store's reputation." "You built nothing," Evelyn cut in sharply. "The women in this room built this boutique, and you tore them down for your own gain." Security arrived within minutes. Vivian tried to protest, tried to spin a different story, but it was useless. The moment the guards stepped forward, her bravado crumbled. Her heels scraped against the floor as she struggled against their grip, but they dragged her toward the exit, past the stunned employees who now whispered in hurried, disbelieving tones. The doors shut behind her. A beat of silence followed. Then, as if released from a spell, the workroom exhaled. Women turned to one another, exchanging shocked glances, some murmuring their disbelief, others simply shaking their heads in stunned relief. Lena let out a slow, trembling breath and turned to Evelyn. You really are Evelyn Carter." Evelyn met her gaze. "Yes." Lena swallowed hard. "What happens now?" Evelyn looked around the room. The seamstresses, Margaret, Mark standing awkwardly near the back, uncertainty thick in the air. "Now," she said, "we fix this." The silence in the boutique was different now. Where once there had been fear and tension, a fragile sense of hope flickered in the air, uncertain but alive. The women in the workroom sat motionless for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. Then, in quiet ripples, the whispers began, hands covering mouths, eyes wide with disbelief. Vivian was gone. Evelyn stood in the center of it all, her presence no longer hidden, no longer restrained. She could feel their eyes on her, some awestruck, some wary, but all waiting. The weight of responsibility pressed against her ribs. Margaret was the first to speak. "You really had no idea what was happening, did you?" Evelyn turned to the older woman, recognizing the quiet accusation beneath the words. No, she hadn't known, not fully, but that wasn't an excuse. The store bore her name. These people had trusted in her vision, and she had let someone else corrupt it. "No," she admitted. "But I should have." Margaret studied her for a long moment before nodding. The acceptance in her expression wasn't immediate forgiveness, but it was something. A start. Lena stood as well, her movements hesitant. "Does this mean things will change?" Evelyn met her gaze. "Yes," she said firmly. "Starting now?" She turned to the entire workroom, raising her voice just enough to be heard over the quiet murmurs. "I know I can't undo what's been done overnight, and I won't pretend I can. But what I can promise is this: there will be no more stolen wages, no more threats, no more fear." She let that sink in before continuing. "And if you have concerns, if there's something wrong, you will always have a direct line to me." There was a pause. Then Margaret, with a wry smile, said, "We'll hold you to that." A breath of laughter rippled through the room, soft but real. Evelyn turned to Mark, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet throughout the ordeal. He stood near the back, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a weight lifted perhaps. "You knew what was happening," she said, not accusing, but not letting him off the hook either. Mark hesitated, then nodded. "I did," he admitted. "Not all of it, but enough." His jaw tightened. "I should have done more." "Yes," Evelyn agreed. "You should have." She watched the guilt settle over him before adding, "But you still have a chance to make things right." He nodded once, something shifting in his expression. "Tell me what you need." It was a simple sentence, but it carried weight. A pledge, a willingness to rebuild. Evelyn exhaled. "First, the payroll records. Every hour worked, every dollar unpaid. I want a full breakdown by the end of the day. Every employee who's been shorted will be compensated immediately." Mark gave a sharp nod. "I'll get started." She turned back to the workroom. "Margaret, I want a list of what's been cut, supplies, staffing, anything that's made your jobs harder." "That ends today." Margaret's eyes gleamed with something like approval. "Consider it done." The energy in the room shifted again, no longer just shock, but something deeper, a cautious belief that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. Evelyn spent the next several hours walking through the boutique, speaking with employees one-on-one, listening to their stories. Some were hesitant, afraid this was all temporary, that things would return to the way they were once the dust settled. Others were eager, relieved to finally be heard. By the end of the day, she sat in her office, reviewing the reports Mark had compiled. The numbers made her stomach turn. Vivian had been stealing far more than just wages. Corners had been cut in ways that compromised not only the work environment, but the quality of the products themselves. If it had gone on much longer, Yves Atelier's reputation would have crumbled under its own weight. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. There was work to do. A lot of it. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. When she called for them to enter, Lena stepped in, hands clasped in front of her. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said quietly, "for standing up for us, for fixing things." Evelyn gave her a small smile. "You shouldn't have had to wait for me to fix things. But I'm here now." Lena hesitated, then asked, "Are you staying?" Evelyn understood what she meant. Not just in title, not just in passing. Was she staying in the business, involved, present? "Yes," she said, the certainty settling in her bones. "I am." Lena's shoulders relaxed, and for the first time since Evelyn had met her, she smiled. As the door closed behind her, Evelyn looked around the office. The space she had once called her own, now unfamiliar, but waiting to be reclaimed. She had come in as Eva Clark, uncertain of what she would find. Now, she remained as Evelyn Carter, and she would make damn sure her name meant something again.